welcome Shivani. Lovely to have you in Bangalore. And what a fantabulous evening you gave us yesterday. And I think the Bangalore audience loved it. What a wonderful performance that was.
Thank you for having me, Manish. It was really wonderful to be here. We see a lot of Kathak in the north, but all your audience members, I think, appreciated that you brought something to them, which was.
Yeah, so to that point, that is really the idea. Aadyam is a brand, likes to, of course, our core and our heart is in textiles. So while we do textiles, the whole idea today is to bring all the aspects of culture and enjoy them with our audience in the brand, so that the brand has a angle to it which is more experiential. And when I say culture, it could be art, it could be dance, it could be music. So thank you so much for being a part of this family and bringing it alive with us. So this conversation I think is more about, let's just talk about how and why do we sort of feel that there is a confluence in what you do and what we do. And I think all the cultural aspects actually talk to each other. So they are always connected in some way or the other. So, but one of the most beautiful aspects which I feel like the way Kathak has, and I'm sure we'll love to hear from you, that how Kathak has this Sufi version, the Ghazal version, the Mughal inspired one, as well as the temple inspiration, which is where the Krishna Gopi part comes in. And therefore, it's very syncretic in nature. There is this whole Hindu-Muslim confluence. And similarly in textiles, almost all the clusters that we work with, I see that the Hindu and the Muslim communities really work in tandem.
Right.
And there are certain textiles which are only woven by Muslims, there are certain which are woven by Hindus. They have practices such as the Hindus will not put a black on the loom because if it's a bridal sari, Banarsi considered to be that, Paithani considered to be that, then they don't put black on the loom.
I see.
Or the Muslims will not weave animal motifs. So there are these idiosyncrasies which are also lovely.
Lovely. I'd like to know more about this at a later stage. That's
so.
Lovely.
But similarly, how do you experience this in Kathak? And it'd be lovely to hear that aspect also.
So I think the conversation between cultures that we have in India is so unique, and because we've had a series of influences in our history, in our very long history, it's wonderful how everything blends and how India just adopts whatever comes into it. It has its disadvantages, but I think in our traditional cultures, whether it's weaves, whether it's dance, whether it's music, languages, there's so many, within quotes, hybrids that came about that have created these entirely separate systems. In Kathak, I think the uniqueness of the dance form is that it's a North Indian dance form, and all our invasions used to happen from the north. So there's been a lot of influence that came in. So much so that people began to believe, because of the heavy Islamic influence that came, and then due to the work of patrons like Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, a lot of people came under this misconception that that is the origin of this dance form. However, the origin dates back to pre-4th century BC, because and 4th century BC because that's written reference. There are Prakrit texts. There is mention in the Mahabharata. Of course, there's a lot of conversation. That itself is a subject of what that is. But if there's a reference, that means there is a tradition imagined from that point as ancient, and today we are practicing it in its nuanced and evolved form. So, and it's a temple tradition. So, temple tradition means that there were these groups of Kathaks. Kathak means storyteller. So, groups of storytellers that used to go from place to place, temple to temple, and talk about the stories of the gods. Now, stories of the gods, again, it wasn't really a religious thing as much as it was a cultural thing, because all those stories had a meaning, and you were trying to impart a certain, how we have morals of the stories and all. There was always a message in those stories. And that's how these stories now, what is in India, I don't think we do anything without music and dance, So the stories automatically were musical, were expressive, were shown through movement, and of course words and text, So that tradition is, if the temple tradition was very strong, then Islam comes in and adds this totally beautiful Shringaric version, which is more to do with adornment. Now, Islam has its own beliefs. As you said, there are different motifs that are not do's and don'ts, but there's a certain thing that you will stay away from or go towards. So Islam does not believe in idol worship, for example. So in Hinduism, there's idol worship. So there's a lot of iconography, and you speak about, Krishna's flute and Krishna's, peacock feather, very visual references.
Right.
Islam, on the other hand, came with this, nuance, tehzeeb, and this restraint, and the courtesan culture as it came in to the thing. Courtesan culture was, again, in history, it's received, there's a lot of misconceptions because of British rule. Now, when the British came with their Victorian traditions, there was a lot of conservatism that came. A lot of people popularly believe that that is, again, the reference. But actually, the courtesans were highly evolved. They were the divas of culture. They were the finest. They were learned women.
True.
And this patriarchy did not apply to them. It was a very unique system of, and I would say, like, in a lot of ways, the feminism that we understand is in that grouping. The Nawabs, the patrons, everybody went to them for learning. They were so all the nuance, the etiquette of and the culture of Islam that came, and they were hanging out with the rulers, So they were imparting etiquette to the rulers. And this beauty came into the dance form, So the Shringar and the Bhakti met, and they married into each other. They came with their outfits and their clothes, and the weaves again changed, like the kind of, you will have more of a input on what the traditions were. But it's just such a beautiful confluence, and it makes us who we are and makes us so unique in our arts.
So like a few things that you said, like the practitioners, they were truly the ones who were, so to say, holding this craft together.
Yes.
So this art of narration as well as the art of expression. However, like, this brings me to another point, like, so again, if I take an analogy from textiles, I think the way Ikat is practiced in 3 places in India, and of course not to talk of how it is also practiced
across the world,
across
right?
the world.
Yeah.
But however, in India itself, I think the signature in all the 3 places is very distinct. So even if one was to look at it technically, the Odisha ones are more curvilinear, the Pochampalli ones are more geometric, while the Gujarat ones have more floral and animal motifs. So I think it is defined by what they see around themselves. So like the Konark temple is a recurring motif in Odisha because it's like the temple architecture. Right. So I think they always imbibe from whatever is around them, and that becomes the signature and gets infused into the textile. I'm sure similar things happen when you have the Jaipur Gharana versus the Banaras Gharana versus the Lucknow. And would you share with us as to how they evolved in their own styles and signature?
I think it's very interesting what you just said. It's true. We are so diverse that every area, as soon as you change a little bit of the geography in India, everything changes. Food, clothes, culture, everything changes. It's almost like being in separate worlds. So we are influenced very much by our surroundings, by nature particularly, I think, because that's how we've evolved through the generations. So for us, the Gharana system, I think, it was generations of families. Like in India, it became such that you did what your parents do, and obviously you pick up again. It's the influence of what's around you.
As in the weaving.
Exactly. Yeah. So you just carry on a tradition, and the gharanas so we have specific gharanas in Kathak which are being practiced, but I think also today the confluences happen between them because of the communication and the ease of travel, and now you pick up the best from everything or what appeals to you, right? Like, so you bring a mix. The Jaipur Gharana is known for a particular kind of movement, for example, and this is very simplistic because now there's a lot of exchange. The Jaipur Gharana is known for, like, it's fast footwork and pirouettes and very technical, technically more percussion based, because again traditionally the gharana began with people who were basically percussionists.
Yeah.
In my understanding, and these are all very debatable issues, but that's where it. So the rhythm aspect is very, very strong. Again, not to say that in the other gharanas is not there or that they don't have the other nuances, but this you identify, like a layperson be like, oh, this is Jaipur gharana because it's fast, it's got pirouettes, and there's more emphasis on the rhythmic technical aspect. Then if you go into the Lucknow gharana is very nuanced. Again, patronage was different. It's evolved. The courtesans were educated in this. That was the area, Awadh and Lucknow.
More expressive,
more restrained, very delicate. All that Ada and Tamiz, all of that, they are associated with. But again, Maharajji was 7th generation of that gharana. I know more about it because that's the gharana I've mainly learned from. But again, he was one of the greatest rhythm maestros that the world has ever seen. Like, Ustad Zakir Hussain admittedly says that he picked up things from it. That's the level of genius he had over rhythm. So again, the lines are blurred. It's not like one doesn't have. But that's again an identity thing that you pick up. Banaras Gharana also, Banaras actually was the seat of a lot of culture, because again with weaves, there's so much that happens there. It is the heart. It's even said that Varanasi was created according to the skies. It's a consecrated city. Of course, we've changed everything with time and lost that knowledge. But Banaras is a holy place, and Banaras has that very folkish element still in Kathak. Like they'll do things, for example, they'll do chakkars on their knees. It's a little bit more acrobatic. We have some greats because again, folk has a base. Classical has developed from the local forms, and there is no hierarchy, between the two. But it's just that nuance, the people develop. Exactly. Yeah. And classical, obviously, the masters have developed it over a long period, so it's not as easy. But it has that rustic element to it. Having said that, this gharana system, as I said, it's all coming together now. We have a Raighar gharana as well now. People are trying to create more, but I think this should be moved away from, because we are part of one composite culture, again, as you said. So we should come together. But an identity develops from every region. I think that's what you're also saying with the clothes. An identity comes from wherever you reside or wherever you develop. And then you teach your students that discipline.
So as you very rightly put, I think things are all the time evolving. So I think it is important for us to recognize this, that there is a lot of exchange, there is a lot of confluence that should happen. However, I think this is a point of debate, like you rightly said, that there is always a merit of having a gharana for a signature, for some kind of identification, to say that this is where it emerged from. Yes. And however, all forms of art should continue to evolve, because they need to continue to remain relevant for audience where the tastes are changing.
Absolutely right.
So I think again in textiles, for example, what we try and do is, and this is what our effort is always, is to keep the authenticity, the signature of the textile alive, so that we don't distort it. However, we keep infusing into it global perspectives, colors, textures, which may or may not be originally practiced there.
Yes.
So I think it does two things. One, it does is that it brings freshness to it. Yes. So the audience likes the fact that there is something new to now buy from, let's say, Banaras. The other thing it does for us is that the weavers feel challenged, because they feel that they're also learning while they're working with us. They're also actually being able to create something afresh, something which they have never tried before, and therefore they feel sort of very inspired by that.
Yes. What you spoke about, that you are challenging the weavers, I think that's very well said, because what happens is that the exposure that you have, wherever you come from, as a team, as a person, as a brand, the weaver who's sitting pretty much in their almost timeless space, because they have inherited a certain art and they are working on it, and that's very important, because the fundamentals should always remain. You cannot, if you don't have a base, you can't fly. But when you come in and you explain to them that this is what's happening in the outside world, And this is, even if there's a little bit of resistance, you're able to imbue that freshness. And I think that's beautiful, because that's how evolution happens. But you're not taking away from what their actual skill is. The skill set remains the same. It's just that your design and your marketing and your packaging lifts it into the modern context. That's beautiful. I think also I see that in whether it's colors or motifs, and we were discussing this about white and gold, for example, that's such a classic combination of colors for Indian textile and fabric, and most of us love to wear it. And you mentioned that you are trying to do things that are traditionally in those colors in others, taking it forward to that. So that appeals to a different kind of mindset and a different kind of space. I'd like to ask you first, like, what is it that you pay attention to in terms of the motifs and the colors? Like, a little bit more about it, because that was so interesting for me. Like, you even mentioned that, using animals and knot and symbolism like that. Like, I mean, I'd love to know more about it because it's very inspiring.
So actually, again, in the design vocabulary of different weaves, there are certain colors which are prevalent, and there are, in fact, like the jamdani that you're wearing, there is a very classical Shwetambari, Pitambari, Raktambari, Neelambari. So these are like defined colors where you get the white and the red and the blue and the yellow. So there is this very beautiful play of colors that is inbuilt in the system, which is very refreshing, because India is about colors, and so the weavers have actually defined them in their own languages, and I think they're also connected in some way to the moods. So there are certain colors which are preferred for certain kind of, say, something is for the spring, something is for the basant, something is for the winters. So there's this whole so to say consciousness
like
about
the rags. I'm thinking rags. Every season has
all
that,
things come together, and that's how even the weaver feels a part of it, that okay, I am offering this to you for the season. So while today we talk about forecasting and seasonality and whatever, I think it was always inbuilt in the system. So again, in Kathak also, like I would like to ask you that perhaps that when you do a piece, like you did a beautiful Draupadi piece yesterday, which had a lot of agony and a lot of anger, and then you did another one which was about Virahe, and so how do you, if you were to choose colors to show your emotion, or to not to show but to sort of complement your emotion, how does that work for you, and what kind of textile? Like I see somewhere you should use a heavier textile because you need to have that gravitas. Somewhere sheerness works because you're now talking about airy, beautiful expressions. So
how beautiful, So what you're saying is actually we are such a intellectual tradition. We really are. That our God knows who they were, rishis, masters, whoever you call them, because they were centuries old, these people, and there are texts. The Natya Shastra actually mentions the Navaras, which is the 9 sentiments, the 9, moods. It has 8 actually, the 9th one came in later. Each sentiment has a defined color. Every one of them has been assigned a color for that. So that's there. We don't necessarily use it because it's so much mood based, right? If you how much feeling based. But for example, if you're doing Mirabai, I mean, your mind will go to a white or maybe a certain kind of a yellow or a certain, it's immediate, like the thought, that peace, that serenity, If you're doing Radha, you will go into this, full color, the Rani, like, if you're doing Draupadi, you'll go red, like you'll go like an emerald green, like a very royal, you go into that zone. So the characters have certain moods and expressions, and you pick up that sort. So it helps. The Aharya Abhinaya, it's called. There are 4 kinds of Abhinaya that are mentioned again in the text. I'm not creating this is all there. So if anyone wants to refer to it, it exists. But even your moods, it's so automatic. You don't have to think of. So Aharya is what you wear. It's costume. It's that also expresses. So it's very important what you wear. It's not frivolous. It adds, it adds, it amps, that gives that extra value to what you're doing.
Wonderful. Yeah. That's why we are together.
Yes, Aryas. Yeah.
And of course, not to forget, we have the sound of the loom. So whenever I visit a weaver, in whichever place it is, I think that beautiful sound which is always very calming. You know, if you
Yes.
go to a mill versus a loom or like a hand loom,
Yeah.
there's like the hand loom gives you a calming sound, and the mill
Mm.
gives you what strikes to you as a
Mm.
sort of something that you want to escape from.
Mm.
And then you have
Yeah.
the gungroo. So I think
Yeah.
there is this
Yeah.
confluence which is so beautiful. Again, like you have
Yeah.
the, I'm sure you will be able to.
Yeah.
So I think not only what we've talked about various aspects, but there is this sound also, I think, where
Yeah.
we have a confluence.
We are, as human beings, bodies of sound. I think the universe was created by sound. We are all bodies. Our heartbeat is a steady, constant sound. And there's so much, I don't know, I think it's just very, what's the word for it? Almost, I'm not getting the word. You know, at our very core, that's who we are. So anything steady in
Right.
rhythm is something that can put you in a state of higher being. Now, whether it is the sound of the loom, whether it is the sound of the theka we have in Kathak, you know, everything, not just Kathak, all of our musical forms, dance forms, there is a base of rhythm.
Or like the tanpura.
Or like the time, all of them. There is someone holds you steady, and then everyone else is free to fly. You know, so that steadiness, that rhythmic aspect, is very spiritual, and it's very inherent. So we don't have to be artists to be that.
Yes.
You know.
It's wonderful chatting with you, and hope to do a lot more of things together.
Yes.
And yeah.
You've given me so many ideas in this conversation that I can.
No, and so have I.
Yeah.
So yes, look forward to more things.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.